Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Lecture 1 on PhoneGap. So it's great to see so many people here tonight. And we're going to start a bit of a course over the next few weeks where we're going to teach you all about mobile development and how to go about it using this tool called PhoneGap. So it's going to be quite an exciting time. I've had a lot of interest in it. So what we'll be doing tonight is really just, I guess, talking through some of the structure of what we'll be delivering. It's going to be a little bit sort of admin related. There's a lot of background, there's a lot of overview we've got to do. So not a lot of coding, but we kind of need to give a lot of this background first just to give you an idea of what we're going to be discussing. So just if we have a look at what we're aiming to do, I guess the first thing is to keep you entertained. Programming shouldn't be boring. You know, we want to definitely have an enjoyable career. I know a lot of people here are interested in working with mobile, or you think it might be something interesting to kind of get into. So I'm going to show you a lot of examples, different technologies, and at least out of this, you'll certainly work out whether it's something you want to pursue or not. So you'll definitely learn a lot. The other thing as well is that there'll be some actual takeaways, I suppose, from this as well. You will get an app to play with. We're going to be working on one over the next few weeks, and every week it'll make a little bit more progress. The great thing as well with this is it's going to run on a whole bunch of different hardware. And I suppose one of the other main goals we're going to try and achieve with this is to really demystify it. People talk all about app development, but not a lot of people really know what it is. And in fact, one of the things we'll be talking tonight is what is an app? And, you know, really getting down to that definition of what it really means to have a mobile app. So first of all, who am I? Well, I won't take too much time on this, but just to let you know that I do know a little bit about what I'm talking about. I've given you a photo there. That's one hopefully that you won't recognise of me if you see me down at the supermarket with a nice hat on. So you can't find me or asking me any programming questions if you run into me at the shops. But just quickly, I've been working in IT for 20 plus years or more. I started when I graduated from my university course. I did a Bachelor of Computer Science, and then I went on and did an honours year after that. When I finished that degree, it was pretty much when the internet was being released into the mainstream. It was when the first Netscape browser came out, which is around about 93, 94. And I actually started writing web pages as HTML was being released to the public. So we'd write web pages, and then, you know, a few days later they'd deprecate some of the tags and you'd have to start again. So really right there at the beginning, certainly in terms of when it came into the public use. My first job was working for a research organisation. I worked at a place called the Distributed Systems Technology Centre at the University of Queensland. And my job there, in addition to sort of doing research on distributed technology and ways to work with computers and make them talk to each other, was actually training a lot of government organisations on what the internet was and what you could do with it. So I spent a few years travelling around the country teaching the federal government all about how to use the internet. And indeed, I guess what it was. And this was back when I remember one of my PowerPoint presentations actually had a list of every single website that was available at the time. And I could fit it on one PowerPoint slide. So things have definitely changed a lot since then. I've been working as a developer fairly much since that time, and in a lot of different areas, plus teaching has been going as well. So had the opportunity to work on a lot of big projects, a lot of big companies. So as we go through the course, I'll be telling you a few war stories as well, and so that everything that we discuss hopefully has some relevance to the real world as we go. Particular areas that I've worked in and along the way, a lot of native app development for mobile. So I'll be talking about what that is as we go. A lot of back end, done a lot of work with databases, lots of connecting front ends to back ends with mobile devices and all sorts of varying different kinds of devices, all sorts of bizarre kind of machines that all have to be hooked up to other machines in a lot of areas as well. So games, banking, accounting, interactive, pretty much everything, all sorts of stuff. So hopefully some of that experience is going to come to the fore tonight, and over the next few weeks I'll be able to give you a hand. And at the moment, what I'm up to, I have my own consulting company, do a lot of software development in a range of areas. Also still lecture as well, working for Charles Sturt, and I'm working my way through my MBA and my PhD at the moment. So what I'm going to do now is actually we're going to hand over just for a minute to James, so James Hale, who's from Charles Sturt and IT Masters. So he's going to have a chat to you a little bit about what this program is and what we'll be doing over the next few weeks. So maybe if we can hand over there to you, James, now.
Thank you, Steve. Hey, everyone. Steve, I don't have direct control over the screen, so I might just at the end of each slide say,
Yeah, sure.
just get you to click it over. So,
Okay.
as Steve said, my name's James, and I do a lot of the behind-the-scenes running of these short courses. I also sit in on each of these webinars assisting with answering admin questions. Thus, we can free up Steve to focus on the content. I'm going to talk to you for just a couple of minutes now, a little bit about us, Charles Sturt University and IT Masters, and the program that this short course is based off. Normally, we'd have our course director, Jason Howarth, speak to you about this, but he's come down with the flu today. CSU first linked up with IT Masters about 10 years ago to deliver content that is relevant and industry-focused as IT courses. They're all postgraduate, master's level courses. The experience you're going to have in this short course is similar to what you would get if you were a CSU student. We have a number of different master's programs. The one that this course is from is our brand new Master of Mobile Applications Development. As you can see on the slide here, it consists of 8 core mandatory subjects, and you get to choose from 4 elective subjects. The subjects range from broad skills necessary in the industry, such as professional communications, down to very targeted skills, such as developing for a particular device. As you can see there, there's the ITE 517, developing for a Windows phone. It's a distance ed course. We're based in Australia, but the degrees are able to be delivered by distance education to anyone in the world. I'll speak just quickly now about entrance requirements. We recognize that unlike a lot of other professional industries, many IT professionals don't have undergraduate degrees, bachelor degrees. If you don't have a bachelor degree, there could be a pathway into the program for you. So if you've been working in the industry for a fair while, let us know, as you could be eligible for based on your industry experience or your industry certifications. There's an eligibility form on our website, which I'll put a link to in the chat box. So if we could just move over to the next slide, Steve. In terms of Charles Sturt University as a deliverer of distance education, you can see here in the Australian market where you line up the leading universities.
We seem to have lost James there. I'm not sure if anyone else can hear him there or not. He's just seems to have disappeared there for a second. Oh no, here he is back again. Try again. See again? Okay. Sorry, just dropped out there.
How much did we miss there, Steve?
Probably about 30 seconds or so. I couldn't hear you for there. So.
All right, I'll speak on this slide again just quickly.
All right. Yeah.
I'll be done in just a minute, guys.
Yeah.
So in terms of Charles Sturt University as a deliverer of distance education, you can see here in the Australian market, Charles Sturt is the market leader. We've got 30,000 distance education students. We've got about 10,000 on-campus students. Distance education is our main focus. We do it very well. We utilize tools such as webinars like this one that you're on now, discussion forums that you can chat to your classmates, and other online resources. Just the last slide, please, Steve.
Sure.
And just here is a chart showing where CSU also ranks as the market leader for postgraduate IT degrees in Australia. So this sort of shows that the IT sector is a really big specialty for the university. That's all from me. Jason will actually be running an info session, who's the course director, for interested students next week. If you are interested in hearing a bit more about this, it'll be about a 20-minute presentation from Jason. I'll post up a registration link on this short course's discussion forum. I'll let you go on with the show now, Steve. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks very much. All right, so that gives you a bit of an overview. So what I'll do now is just have a bit of a chat about what we're going to be offering for you over these next few weeks. So specifically what we'll be doing is Android and iOS builds. So if you have these devices, we'll be able to send code that you create directly to them. If you have a Windows device, we can also send it to Windows Phone as well. So that's all completely possible. There are opportunities to build for BlackBerry as well, but it's fairly rare that I come across people who've actually got BlackBerry devices, but that is possible as well. So the idea is that, as I said earlier, we'll be incrementally building on an existing app as we go, so that we'll be adding more and more features every week. And so at the end of this, you'll have something that's quite sophisticated. And the idea is that we're using PhoneGap, we're going to link to all the sensors and the hardware that are currently available that we can. So this is including things like GPS, compass, camera, all that kind of thing. So getting right down to everything in the hardware in the phone. Okay, now in terms of software requirements of what you will be required to have, there is really no requirement specifically. You could do everything you need to on Notepad. So if you wanted to, you can just basically start with nothing and type your code straight in as HTML. That's probably the most painful way that you could do it, I've got to say. If you have a development environment already, it would probably be easier to work within that one. So again, it does depend a little bit on what hardware you're going to be targeting. You can choose. So you can choose whether you're going to work on Android or iOS. If you're going to be targeting iOS, then work in Xcode for Mac. And if you are targeting PC, you can use either Visual Studio or you can use Eclipse as well for Android. So those are the common options. Now, it's not necessary that these are the ones that you have to use. I'm just saying that these are common ones that are available. So this is really just basically your editor. We're typing in text, it's going to get compiled. So, you can use whatever you like. That said, though, there are going to be HTML frameworks, and I do recommend that we all use one of those. These frameworks are going to make the end result look a lot better, and you'll get a lot more value for the effort that you're putting in if you use an HTML framework. Now, if you do that, it is easier, again, if you do have a proper development environment to use with that, just because there's a lot of additional code that goes in. Now, we'll obviously have to install PhoneGap. Now, PhoneGap itself is free, no charge on that. Depending on the way that we do builds, you may need an account on Adobe Build. Now, Adobe itself have accounts. I'm not sure if you're aware of the cloud service that Adobe now offers. So if you've seen their applications like Photoshop and After Effects and that kind of thing, it used to be extremely expensive to buy these pieces of software. And now what you can do is have a subscription and pay for it by the month. So if you have one of those subscriptions already, you'll already be able to use Adobe Build. If not, I think the cheapest is about $9.95 per month, and it's month to month. So if you wanted to sign up on that will allow us to do builds in the cloud, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. But this does mean that you wouldn't need to have any development environment other than Notepad, I guess, on board your machine, and we can just literally upload the code and compile it in the cloud and then distribute it directly onto a mobile device. I'm going to be talking through exactly what this is all about, but just to give you a bit of an overview of what we're required. The other thing is an HTML framework. Again, that's one of the things we're going to be covering tonight, of what that is. jQuery Mobile is the default I would go for, in that it's free and it's very common. We'll talk through that. And then that's pretty much it. The rest of the software that we would require is all free. So there's certainly not too much that you're going to have to outlay to get started with this. Now, as far as the course structure goes of what we're going to be doing, we have lots of people online tonight and over these next few weeks, plus with people who watch it later as well. So I will endeavour to answer questions, but it's given that I'm talking through some content here, it is a little bit difficult. So James is going to be helping out a bit as well to sort of collate questions as well, but it certainly is easier if you use the forums, and then I'll try and have a look at that over the course of the week and give you a bit of a hand if you're getting stuck along the way. So this format works a bit better really as a lecture. It's a little bit difficult to make it interactive, certainly when we've got hundreds of people that are all listening at the same time. Okay, so assumptions. these are things that I'm assuming that you know. Now I've said here that you know HTML. You don't need to be able to live and breathe HTML, but you certainly need to have some concept of what it is. I'm going to be putting up HTML on the slides, and I would hope that you can kind of read along a bit with it. So I'm not assuming that you're a master programmer at all, because if you were, you probably would find that you could work this out, and or there's lots of different pathways to building apps. So yeah, so what I'm not going to teach you all the HTML, but it's pretty easy for you to follow along. Some exposure to JavaScript as well would be good, certainly to be able to recognize it and understand the syntax. So I will be using a fair bit of JavaScript as we go, but again, you don't need to be able to write hundreds of lines of the stuff. So the PhoneGap code is actually quite simple. It's just a collection of APIs. If you're wanting to put graphics on, then you may need to do some basic image manipulation, but again, you don't have to have a license of Photoshop or anything like that. Again, what you build really is up to you, as long as it demonstrates what we're trying to achieve in terms of linkages to hardware and that kind of thing. As you're probably aware, for anybody who's been involved in any programming, most of the time we separate the look and feel of UI and give that to a graphic artist rather than get the programmer to code it. Certainly I would rather do that myself. Everything that comes back from a graphic artist looks a lot better than when I have a go at it. So you don't worry too much about what's going to look like. Now, if you do want to test what we're developing, you will have to have access to a mobile device. So the great thing about PhoneGap is it works on a number of platforms, so it's highly likely that the device that you've got is going to work. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's an iPhone or an Android machine or a Windows mobile, they should all be able to work, and particularly if we use the Adobe Build way of distributing applications. Now, if you want to deploy this, so let's say that you've built an amazing application, you think it's absolutely brilliant, and you want to sell it, it's completely possible for you to do that. Now, you can either put that up on the Google Play Store or you can put it on the App Store through Apple, but you will need to have a developer account if that's the case. And if you're wanting to distribute it to lots of other people, even just to test, you'll probably have to end up getting a developer account. Now, the Apple account costs $99 per year for a single developer. So if that's something you're wanting to do, it's not a hard process. You just have to go and sign up with Apple at developer.apple.com, I think it is, and you can get yourself an account there. But that's not required for us with what we're doing. Okay, so a few things just to set the expectation of what we're going to be doing. This is not a course in HTML5. We will be using a lot of the features of HTML5 in order to demonstrate what's possible, but I'm not going to be teaching that specifically. This is a PhoneGap course. So if you came here wanting to learn how to make amazing apps that look brilliant with incredible features, that's not really what this is all about. This is about getting HTML code and tags and all that kind of thing and turning it into an app. So I'm not going to be teaching you about how to make the world's most amazing app, but I'm certainly going to be teaching you how to access all the features of PhoneGap in order to do that. So likewise, I'm not going to be teaching you JavaScript. I'm not going to teach you good web design or anything like that. I'm not going to teach you database programming, and I'm not going to teach you about web services and APIs. We've got more than enough to cover in these few weeks just on PhoneGap itself, but PhoneGap will make use of all these technologies as well. Now, if you're interested in these sorts of things, you may have a background in them already, or if not, there's certainly courses, additional ones that are taught here that where you can learn all that stuff as well. So any kind of app development makes use of a lot of different technologies, and these are just some of them. And it's one of the reasons why big apps tend to have a lot of different programmers working on them. It's not just the physical amount of code that needs to be written, but because there are various different skill sets. You've got people who do the graphic design, you've got people who work at the back end with all the database stuff, you've got ones in the middle that are dealing with all the APIs, and just goes on and on. So lots of different skills here. It's really a great career because you can work out where you want to specialize. So today, as far as what we're going to be delivering tonight, introduction, a little bit about the history of what PhoneGap is, and some overview. And I was going to cover off installation and do a small example, but to be quite honest, what happened was the slides that I brought over tonight have got about half the amount that I thought they did, and I left the other ones at work. So it's actually going to work out quite well though, because the way that it's split is that we'll go through everything tonight that's just kind of the overview, and then I'm going to record tomorrow morning an installation. So we'll do it as a separate video, and I'll put that up online for you to go through. And that is actually quite technical. So it's the installation that I'm going over is specific to Android. Now, if you've been trying to get PhoneGap going, particularly on a PC with an Android build, it can be very, very complex, and you can end up scratching your head and throwing your computer into the corner. Just because there's so much in terms of software that's got to be downloaded and ways to configure it. So what I've done is I've actually screen grabbed every single step of the process, and I've gone through it in a PowerPoint presentation to show you how to do that and to make sure that it actually works. And so I was going to do that tonight, but as it works out, I think it's actually going to be better if we separate that out anyway. So we'll do that as a separate video, and then probably I'll also do the same thing for Mac as well. So if anyone's interested in doing iOS development specifically on a Mac, then I'll do an installation video for that one as well, and then you can see exactly how to get your Mac configured to use PhoneGap as well. So we're kind of covering all the development platforms. All right, so into it. So let's just have a look here. If you look at this diagram, this is came out on 28th of February this year, and you can see here, this is the, as it says, the time spent accessing the internet by device. So this is the bit that we're interested right here in, because this shows that there's been a crossover where mobile applications are being used to access the internet more than desktop. So you can see that this crossover here means that our mobile devices are the ones that we're really using a lot of. Not only that though, this diagram shows something else, which is down here you can see mobile using a browser as opposed to an app. So this is actually quite interesting. Sorry, just go back there, because it shows that the internet usage that you may assume is that people are browsing the internet via Safari if you're on an iOS device, and clicking through websites. But in a lot of the case, that's really not true at all. They're actually using apps. So the app market is massive. It's an exploding area of development. It's something where more and more programmers are required, and that's one of the reasons why we have tools like PhoneGap, is just to try and be able to deal with this massive need of, the public's out there trying to use their devices. There's more and more apps are required. So this is what we're going to be building, is an app as opposed to a website. Now I'm going to tell you what the difference of between those are in a second, actually. So they're not as obvious as you might assume. Oh, there we go. Next slide. What is an app? So an app is something very specific, and it's important to understand this. Perhaps I'm assuming that most people here are actually developers or want to be developers, but if you are a client of somebody who, or perhaps you want to get an app developed, it's actually important to know what one is, because you could perhaps be paying for something and getting something completely different. You might have thought that you're going to be buying an application, and in fact what you are doing is you're buying a mobile website, which is really something that you don't want. Okay, so the definition of an app is it's got to be software downloaded from an app store. So in the case of Apple, this is the App Store that they've tried to trademark the name. And in the case of Android, it's from the Google Play Store. An app has a very specific purpose. So it's different from something like a browser where you can just go to whatever site you want, work your way through the internet and just keep yourself merrily surfing, and procrastinating until your battery runs out. That's not what an app is. An app has a very specific purpose to achieve a certain goal. The other thing is that an app is written specifically and is optimized for a mobile device. So an app is not designed to look good on a desktop and then kind of resize itself and look good on a mobile device as well. That's something completely different. That's not an app. So as we've said there in capital letters, an app is not a mobile website. Okay, a mobile website is literally a piece of HTML, and it's dynamic and it resizes itself to look good on a mobile device, but that's not an app. So Of the apps that are out there, 102 billion were downloaded in 2013, of which 91% are free. Interesting to know that, but it still generated $26 billion. Okay, that's from Gartner, that particular quote. So here's one thing to understand. And I do, while this is, again, this is a technical course, and I don't really want to go into the economics of developing apps, but if you go on the App Store, that you'll notice that most of them these days are free. If you went on the App Store maybe 5 years ago, you would see most of them are like $1.99. So things have really changed. There is now what's called the freemium model, which tends to be that apps are free to download and then you buy your content from within it, or that they have a limited set of features, and to get further features you have to buy the pro version or something like that. But this really does indicate that the price has been driven down further and further, where apps on their own as a method of making money, the trend is sort of going away from that now, and they're being used more as things like business tools, where they've been developed by a business as an internal app, or they're being used for advertising to promote something, whereas beforehand it was really they were on their own, they were being putting up on the App Store, hoping to sell millions of these things and raking a lot of money. So it is changing a bit. So we saw a bit of a bubble there. As you know, if you've been in the IT industry long enough, you might have seen a few of these kind of bubbles, but it certainly doesn't mean at all that it's going away, as you can see by these sort of numbers, but it just means that it's changing. And it's becoming a legitimate business tool, that's for sure. Okay, so you're obviously all interested enough in PhoneGap to show up here and want to find out more about it. So it's important to know what PhoneGap actually is. Now, before I started working with PhoneGap, I was a little bit confused. I thought that PhoneGap was some kind of development environment that allowed me to somehow take HTML and sort of work with it on multiple mobile devices across platform. I really wasn't too sure. I mean, I thought it was a development environment, but when I got into it and started playing around with it, I found that it's very different from what I assumed. So it's important at the outset to know exactly what it's going to do for you, and you know what you're still going to be required to do, and what your software task might be. So PhoneGap, just by virtue of its name, the gap part of it, bridges the gap between native apps and web applications. So native apps have access to the hardware directly. So they're able to, as we said before, they're able to access things like the GPS and now the barometer and things like the iPhone 6, all these different sensors that we've got on there, the camera and so on and so forth. And they're able to make use of those and then read the data, write it out somewhere else, do all that kind of stuff with it. A web application is unable to do that. Web application literally just presents data onto the screen, may pull in information from other servers in terms of database information, that kind of thing, but certainly is not able to access the hardware. So what PhoneGap does, it actually gives you a set of APIs where your web code, all your HTML, is able to actually access the hardware directly, and able to read information from those sensors and do a lot of things that you would normally only be able to do with a native app. So a lot of these sort of features are the reasons that you would have created an app in the first place. Now we can create effectively a web application, but have a lot of these sort of features as well. Now, what PhoneGap isn't, and this is important to know, PhoneGap is not a development environment. Okay, you don't download PhoneGap and suddenly it fires up an editor. You still have to use your own editor. It has no widgets and it has no UI controls either. So you don't have a PhoneGap calendar or PhoneGap button or anything like that. None of that sort of stuff. You have to provide all that. That's all done in HTML. So all the UI is everything that you would normally be doing. Now, it does require additional compiling, and we'll go through how to compile it as well, unless you're using the cloud building features that we discussed further before. Now, what it doesn't let you do, or certainly you're going to get in a lot of trouble if you do this, is when you create the app, you don't just basically put a web page inside a frame and call it an app. That's very, very looked down on. And in fact, if you do that with Apple, you'll get in a lot of trouble. So I've got a couple of slides on this to discuss exactly what this is and how you should be presenting an app. Okay. Another term that you may hear as we're going through is something called Cordova. So Cordova can be a little bit confusing because people say, well, you're working with PhoneGap or you're working with Cordova. They're actually effectively the same thing. And to understand this, you need to go back a little bit into the past as to when this was first created. So there was a company called Natobi there that started up in 2009 and created PhoneGap. Now, they made use of a lot of open source software in order to create this. And it was a great product, obviously, and so Adobe then bought out the company in 2011. Now, because a lot of this code that it was based on was actually open source, what ended up happening was Apache decided to donate the entire core of everything that was with PhoneGap and put it back into the public domain. And so as a result, what's in the public domain that's now not controlled by Adobe has gone to Apache and is called Cordova. So you can download that from Apache and you have all the code and everything like that, and you can play around with that, or you can also have the PhoneGap version, which comes from Adobe. Now, at this present point in time, they are exactly the same, and in fact, you can use the terms interchangeably, and there'll be no difference. And when we're compiling and when we're playing around with some of the commands, you'll see sometimes they're Cordova commands, sometimes they're PhoneGap commands. So don't get too confused. As far as everything goes right now, they are the same. Now, PhoneGap really is a distribution of Cordova. It's been split, and it's just another version, really, but currently it's exactly the same. Now, the way that it's going to change going forward is Adobe's going to build a bit of an ecosystem around it. So one of the first pieces of software that's working with this is Adobe Build, and this is their cloud-based compiler. But as far as we're concerned, all you need to worry about is Cordova and PhoneGap are the same, and Adobe has PhoneGap. So that's the only thing that we really need to worry about. Okay, now PhoneGap is used all over the place. Here's just a few apps that you'll see. If you do a Google search, you'll find tons of examples of PhoneGap and being used all around the place for apps. So all the PhoneGap apps are available in either the App Store or the Google Play Store, and no problem at all is being recognized as being able to be sold there. Okay. So the next thing I want to look at is native apps, because you will hear this terminology quite a bit, and the ones that you'll probably come across is called native apps, hybrid apps, and then mobile websites. So it's important to know the difference between all of these. So a native app is written in a low-level language. Well, when I'm saying low-level language, I mean it's written in something like C or C# or Java, Objective-C perhaps, Swift is the new one for iOS, C# for Windows and .NET, and the code lives on the phone. So you create this code, it creates an executable, and then it's deployed and it's put onto the phone. Now, native apps tend to be difficult to write. The learning curve, particularly with something like Objective-C, is substantial. When I first started writing Objective-C apps, I think it probably took me 6 months of really getting my head into it before I felt comfortable enough to be billing my time writing code in it. It was a lot of work and a lot of different calls. It's certainly nothing like HTML. It's in fact as far away as possible as you can from it. In fact, what I have here, the presentation I'm giving to you right now is on the Mac. So I've got some Objective-C I can show you. Let me just see. I'll see if I can pull it up here. You can have a look at it in a minute. There we go. So this is the kind of thing that you're looking at if you want to write a native app. So this is a real application that's currently in production. And you can see that this is really nothing much like HTML. So we've got import statements, as you might see from something like C or C#. The syntax is quite unusual. All functions that kind of thing. You can pointers. There's all kinds of stuff in here. So up until only a couple of versions ago, you actually had to handle all your own memory management and handle your own garbage collection, all this kind of stuff. So wasn't easy. So quite a lot of work to try and get something like this working. This is only a simple application, but you can see over here are all the different view controllers that you've got to work with. So it's a lot of work. And I've got to say it's a pain. So the problem with building something like this is that you can work for months and months and create yourself a beautiful native app that runs really, really fast and is fantastic. But at the end of the day, all you have it running on is one device, and then somebody will say to you, this is great, but now I'd really like to have the Android device, the Android version. But the Android version is in a completely different language. You have to rewrite it. So not ideal at all. So there's got to be a better way to do this, because clients simply aren't going to A, spend the money, or B, really wait for months and months and months while you develop it on every different platform. Okay, so as we said here, it's got a very high barrier to entry. Well, it's almost a brick wall in some cases. Long period before your work is any good. Requires exceptional programmers. It might just be because I'm calling myself an exceptional programmer, I don't know, but you certainly have to know what you're doing. The end result is that your applications are fast, they're very good, but they're expensive as well. So the native apps that you tend to see that are out there are things like banking apps, the native ones that ship on your phone, so things like eBay. The new Facebook one is native, although they ran with a hybrid one for a very long time. So yeah, they are great applications. They run really, really, really well, but a lot of work to create. Now, the other issue, as I've said, is you end up with these multiple code bases. So in order to even maintain this, you're looking at having a Java version and an Objective-C version. Perhaps you've got a .NET version as well. So it's quite hard to keep these things in sync. Now, the great thing about them is that you have absolutely no issue with the App Store. The App Store love native apps. They have no complaints about that sort of thing, but they can have issues with some of these ones that kind of compile to a native app, which is what we're working on here with PhoneGap. Okay, so I think we understand now what a native app is. Now, a mobile website, on the other hand, is something completely different. Now, I've referred to it a few times here, but we'll get into it in a bit more detail. A mobile website has code and pages which live on a server. It is a traditional website. So what you see coming up on your screen is literally being sent across the internet and loaded into a web browser, and then appears on the monitor or your touch device, whatever you've got there. This means that it can be very slow because everything's being streamed across the internet. And of course, it requires that you have an internet connection as well. So if you've got something that looks like an app, but your internet connection goes down, or you put it into flight mode or something like that, then you just can't use it at all because all the information is coming back from the server. So mobile websites are a little bit limiting. What they are good for, though, is optimizing an existing website so that it looks good on a mobile device, but you certainly cannot call it an app. That's something that's just completely different. All right, then we have a third class of applications. So that's what we're dealing with here. So what these are, and this is what PhoneGap actually produce, is a hybrid app. So these are downloaded from the App Store. So you go to Google Play or you go to the Apple Store, you search for the thing just as you would with anything else. It's got an icon and everything like that. You download it and it installs on your phone, and it runs very similarly to a native app, but it isn't one. And what it is something that's built using web technology, so the same techniques that would be used to generate a mobile website, but it's not coming from the server. So this is very important to know because people get a little bit confused. And what they think sometimes is that these apps are a shell of an app with a web view encased within them, and everything is coming back from the server. So effectively you download the app and then it goes to www. whatever and pulls back that entire screen, puts it on your device for you. That's not what's happening. So when we're writing a PhoneGap app, what we're doing is we're actually writing a whole bunch of HTML, but the HTML doesn't live on the server. It lives on our phone. So the web view loads, but it pulls all those HTML files from your phone locally and displays them without actually going off to the internet. So this makes it much, much faster. This also means that the internet connection could go down and it will still work. So again, a big difference from a mobile or website there. Now, it may be that there's dynamic content that is required. You may need to get information from the internet just as you would with an app. And in that case, use the same interfaces that you would with a native app, which are things like Ajax or web services and JSON and those kinds of things, if you're familiar with any of those. And that's how you bring your information back. But everything else should be sitting on the device itself. So very, very important to note. So when you're building these applications as we go forward, particularly if you want to get it past anyone that's checking this stuff before it goes up on the App Store, what you don't do is build yourself a little shell and then drop a web view in it and type www.mycompany.com or something and start pulling that information up, because it's not going to get past anyone that's looking at it before it goes on the store. Now, and I'm talking about Apple here mainly. Okay, so I do need to discuss a little bit about Apple. So the process of getting a mobile application up and onto the store with Apple are fairly intense. I have had applications rejected 2 or 3 times before, and it's on really minor things to do with user interface and fonts and all sorts of stuff like that, or things that they just didn't like on the day. But what it has done, at least they've been attempting to do, is to make sure that the apps that turn up on the App Store are actually reasonably high quality. So Apple has a set of guidelines that you need to conform to if you want these apps to successfully appear. So one of the big ones that certainly relates to us anyway, dealing with PhoneGap, is the web-based designs. So I've cut this out of their terms and conditions. It says reconsider web-based designs. If you're coming from the web, you need to make sure that you give people an iOS app experience, not a web experience. Remember that people can visit your website on their iOS-based devices using Safari on iOS. Now, this really, even though it might not be specified in the same manner for other devices as well, but it should go without saying for anything that you're building. So whatever we build over these next few weeks, what we're trying to do is make something that is not the same as what they could get by just simply browsing to it. We're trying to create something which is an app experience, not a web experience. And so part of that is loading all our code locally, making sure that everything's fast, that the UI looks like an app, that it doesn't look like something off a website, that all the dynamic content is happening in the background, that you don't get looking like it's page loading or something like that. So we really are, and I guess this is one of the main things for people coming from the web, is that you're trying to get away from this page-based methodology of thinking of things and turning into like an app-based methodology where the content's always there or the UI is always responsive, and then any data and everything like that happens in the background and everything still works very, very smoothly. All right, a little bit more from Apple here. Apps that download code in any way or any form will be rejected. Okay, so that's really basically making sure that you don't put something up onto the App Store and then, after it's been approved, it turns into something else magically. Apps that are not very useful or unique or are simply websites bundled as apps or do not provide any lasting entertainment value may be rejected. So this is getting rid of a whole suite of ones. Apple have quite famously said that they don't need any more fart applications. That particular sector of applications is well catered for at the moment. But it goes without saying here, as we said, they're simply websites bundled as apps. We're not trying to build an encased version of a website. We're trying to build something that's much more different. Okay, apps that do not use system-provided items such as buttons and icons correctly, and as described in the Apple Human Interface Guidelines, may be rejected. So this goes for the way that we present the UI. So when you work on a website, you tend to have things like a home button at the top of the screen, and maybe a menu bar across the top. That's not the way that the app works, particularly with touch. So you need to go and have a look at a few apps and see how they work. The UI is very, very different from what you get from a website. All right, so I think pretty much everything else there we have talked about. So a few key things that you need to think about. when I guess this is kind of the takeaway from all their terms and conditions and things that they say before they set about deciding whether you're going to be on the App Store. Your app should be focused on a particular task. So your weather app, for instance, that is on the store that you can download, it has a particular point to it. It tells you the temperature, and maybe it provides you with the tides and the outlook for the next 5 days. That is the purpose of the app. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't let you go out and see the news on CNN. It's very, very pointed in one particular direction, and what it does well. So the other thing is that people must be able to accomplish something. They're not just browsing. So again, your app is not the My Company app, and mycompany.com app just shows you a collection of 5 pages about your company, and how to contact them and your location or something like that. That is not an app. That won't get past Apple. Apple will reject that, and they'll say, go and build yourself a mobile website. However, if you create an app for your company that perhaps is a catalog of all your products, and you can search them, and you can bring up a particular item out of the catalog and rotate it in 360 degrees or something like that, then perhaps that's more orientated towards an app and it might get passed. Again, design for touch. Don't design for clicking with a mouse or anything else that's not going to work with using a finger rather than a mouse. Let people scroll. Don't have a single screen. So we're really used to, on mobile devices now, scrolling down a page. We don't just sort of display all the information on one screen and then click over to another button. That's not the way it works with touch. So these are all the sorts of things that we kind of get used to using a mobile device, but perhaps they haven't really thought about that's how different they are from a website. And as I've already covered off, no homepage icons either. So you've really just got to optimize it with buttons, really, more than anything else. Okay. So when would we use PhoneGap? Well, PhoneGap is great when we want to access the hardware. So when we want to do perhaps more than just simply displaying information on the screen, where we want to work out where the user currently is, or we want to take a photo. Okay, these are all great reasons to use PhoneGap. Also, when speed is important, when we want to do something other than just load very slowly off the internet, so we can package the whole thing onto the device. When you can separate your data and your content. So now this is getting a little bit more into the architecture side of things, but where you have a separate database and then you have a user interface, and they are clearly separated, and so you can stream your data off an external database, and we'll talk about how that all works. When you have a clearly defined purpose, we've talked about that. Another thing that PhoneGap is really great for is because it's so fast to build, because we can build everything in HTML, it's a great prototyping tool as well. We can get it onto a whole number of devices really, really quickly and get it into people's hands, and then they can play with it. And then you can see whether or not your app is going to work before you commit a lot of money to it. So, I mean, it could be that a typical small HTML-based PhoneGap app might cost a couple of grand or something to build. If you went with it as a full native application, it might cost you 20 or 30. So, significantly more amount of effort. Now, you don't want to go to all that effort to create something if it's not going to be successful. So PhoneGap can be a great step up from a website, but before you go fully native, again, just to try and work out whether this is going to be a tool that will work for everybody. And if it's really successful, then perhaps that you can throw the big guns at it and create native a bit later on. Okay, so how are we actually going to do this? So we've talked a lot about reasons why and why not, and how and all this sort of stuff, but what's the methodology that we go about to actually create a PhoneGap app? Well, first of all, we create what's known as a single page application. And I say it tends towards that because not every single PhoneGap app is a single page application. But what this means is that instead of having multiple HTML files, you tend to have one, and this gets loaded in and a piece of it gets presented, and it looks like you're looking at an entire page, but in fact, you are actually just looking at a portion of it. This makes it much quicker. So you need to work with an environment that will support a single page application. We will be talking about what that is in a bit more detail over the next few weeks, so don't worry too much if that doesn't make a lot of sense yet. The way that we will be building everything is in HTML. So there is no need to really know anything much more than that, perhaps a little bit of JavaScript, but that's really all. What you will need to have, though, is a framework to add the mobile controls. So when we looked at what Apple's requirements were for the App Store, you will remember, hopefully, it was only 2 minutes ago, that they were saying that it's not a web experience, it's an app experience. Well, that can be quite difficult to do by coding in HTML. HTML is a tag-based markup language that was originally just designed to display text, written by a bunch of academics to share information between themselves. And over the past 20 years, it's developed further and further to include more and more multimedia and try and keep itself up with everything that's been going on in technology all this time. It's not the best language for anything, really, particularly that we're using it for now anyway. So in order to try and get HTML to produce something that looks like an app, what we end up having to do, or in most cases we have, we certainly it's advisable to do, is to have what's called an HTML framework added onto it. And what this is a collection of JavaScript files that have been written by third parties that we can include into our HTML, and it basically overrides the tags that we've already got there for things like tables and lists and drop-down boxes and all this kind of stuff. And it presents them in a way that look great on mobile devices, but also look great across a whole range of mobile devices. So I know a lot of you out there will be web designers or have been building websites, and one of the most infuriating things about being a web designer is that there are so many browsers out there and you can look fantastic in one, but it just doesn't look any good in another one. Or, you get it looking perfectly in Firefox and it doesn't work in Chrome, or, then it works in Safari and whatever else, and then it won't work in Internet Explorer or Internet Explorer 6. It's terrible. These have been ongoing problems for years. So one of the ways around that has come about in the past couple of years anyway have been these frameworks, and they're orientated towards mobile devices. And what they do is that you can include them and you can reference that code, and that will create you UI elements which will appear on screen that really look good across a whole range of devices. They're optimized for mobile, but they are also platform independent, and they're going to look fantastic on a range of things. So particularly with things like Android is so fragmented in terms of the number of devices that are out there and the ranges of resolutions and screen sizes and everything else, that it's really, really difficult to write code that's going to look good on all these different devices. So it's important to know, in terms of mobile development, that Apple have the iPhone and the iPad with a range of range of resolutions within those. Android is an operating system, and it's not attached to a certain device. Lots and lots of manufacturers make mobile phones and tablets which run Android, but they're not tied together. So Apple are a bit unique in that they own both the hardware and the software, and so if you're developing for Apple, it tends to be a lot easier. Now, as a developer, certainly from my point of view, I tend to be a bit biased, but I think it'd be fantastic if everything ran on Apple, because it would make my job that much easier. But the reality of the world is that it doesn't, and if you committed yourself to one particular brand, then you'd get yourself in all sorts of trouble, and you'd have no clients down the road very, very quickly. So you have to keep working as you go along, making sure that you're compatible with everything. All right. So what we do is the process is that we build this single web page web application. We write the HTML, we add the framework. Then what we do is we add hardware API methods to it. We test it in a browser. So this browser will be something running on your computer generally, and then you deploy it either to your device or to your emulator. So you've got a couple of choices there in terms of what you want to do. Okay, so here is some very basic. This is the kind of thing that we're going to be working with, so not really very hard. this viewport stuff here that you see there, this is code for a framework, and it's basically just a few additional tags. I've written some applications that are currently in commercial use that really weren't too much more complicated than this. They were like the most basic bits of HTML with a few tags in it, but when you linked in the frameworks, they just looked fantastic, and the clients loved them. So you'd be amazed at what's actually possible. So the code that we'll be building over these next few weeks is not going to be anything too much more than this, but you'll be quite amazed by what we're able to achieve. All right, so let's have a look at what the possible frameworks are that we can use. There are quite a range. Now, some of them are commercial and expensive, some of them are free, and then there's ones all in between, some being better than others. I'm not going to recommend a particular framework because this may be something that internally within your organization you decide on. It tends to be a bit of a personal decision, and it often comes down to budget as well as to which one you want to go with. What I'm going to do is show you 2 or 3 of them just as examples so you can see what the kind of range is, but it's completely up to you what you use. And again, this really does affect the UI because they all have different capabilities and features, which will obviously impact what your end result's going to be. But they tend to share a few common things. They're cross-compatible, meaning that they're going to work on a range of devices, and not much point if you buy one that's only going to work on iOS unless it's just iOS devices that you're targeting. They're responsive, so you may have heard of the term responsive design. What this means is that you can dump it onto a bunch of different devices at different resolutions and screen sizes, and it's going to still look good. And this has been one of the problems in web design for a long time, and responsive design has been brought in to kind of address that. The other thing that frameworks give you are more UI elements that are available under straight HTML. So if we're working with HTML by itself, you are fairly restricted as to what you've got. If you wanted something like a calendar control, for instance, that's really not available to you, or some kind of really complex drop-down box or spin control or something like that. They're not normal HTML UI elements. So the way around that is to use a framework which will supply a lot of the stuff for you, and I'm going to show you what some of these are in a minute. They also standardize the look and feel right across your app, take away a lot of the work that you would otherwise have offloaded to a graphic artist or a guru JavaScript programmer, so you don't need to worry about a lot of that. But as I've said here, we're not going to be spending too much time on this stuff. The idea is to pick one and move on, integrate it into your app and use it just to really allow us to demonstrate what we want to do with PhoneGap. And so the whole purpose of this is to create some apps that we're going to reference all the hardware, we're going to pull information back, we're going to control all the various bits of the phone, we're going to offload stuff, send it to a server and back again, do all this kind of stuff. But I don't really care too much what it looks like, as long as it looks like an app and it works like an app. And so that's what these frameworks are going to help you with. So we'll have a look at a few of them. So I'm going to start with one called Kendo UI. Now, this is a commercial one. This is owned by Telerik, I think, from memory. It's HTML based, a very native look, based on the platform as well. So it kind of reconfigures itself a bit depending on what device it's been loaded onto, so that it looks like Android or it looks like iOS, depending on which machine it's on. It's got full support for MVC and Visual Studio, MVC being Model View Controller way of developing, if you're familiar with that. It's got templates, it's got themes, but it's expensive. So I think it's offhand, it's like $900 or something like that, not cheap. This is the kind of thing that you would buy if you're in a development studio or a software house and you're wanting your stuff to look good and you've got a bit of budget, but what it does offer you is fantastic. So these are the UI components that come with it. So if you have a quick look down there, look at all this, like area charts and bar charts, bubble charts, a whole bunch of different editors that come with it, lots of different scheduling, calendar, scheduler, Gantt chart it's got in it, amazing stuff, really, really cool. And all optimized for mobile. So what you can get with this immediately, just by making a few calls with tags into your HTML, and you've suddenly got access to all this sort of stuff. So really, really fantastic. So it goes beyond the fact that we're just getting it to work on mobile to suddenly, being able to start charting things and doing all sorts of stuff. It's really cool. Okay, here's an example. So this is one of their bar charts that they've got, and I did include some source, but it looks like I've got rid of most of what it was underneath there. So but you can easily go to their website and have a look for an example. So and this actually animates and does all sorts of stuff as well. So it's quite cool, but fully configured through HTML. So not too difficult to use and optimized for mobile. So that's definitely an option. That's one of the ones. There are lots of these things. There's probably 10 or so different frameworks. And again, as I said, it just comes down to preference of what you're using, what the budget is for the job, and where you're working, all that kind of thing. Okay, jQuery Mobile. jQuery Mobile is the default one that I will probably be building for in our examples. The main reason being that it's free and it's very, very common. Lots and lots of examples of jQuery mobile sites out there, and it's really easy to use, and it can get us a mobile look and feel up and running very, very quickly, which is kind of what we're trying to achieve. It's not going to look as amazing as one of the previous ones like Kendo, but it's going to work for us. Now, it can be slow with PhoneGap, so that's one thing to note. In fact, jQuery Mobile, one of the main complaints is that when it's used in conjunction with PhoneGap, that it's not particularly responsive. It's a bit slow. So that's something to be aware of, but certainly for our purposes, for just getting to grips with what we want to do, it's not a bad solution. And as you can see here, it's got lots of different elements that we can make use of. So you can see sliders and all this kind of stuff down here. You can theme it to whatever you want. And if you see here, this is the way that these are standard HTML tags here for things like checkboxes and stuff. And they've been styled to look like something off an app. So we're getting sliders and text boxes that don't look like regular HTML forms. So there's no code changes that are required here to make this look like this. All you need to do is really just include a link to it, and all your HTML is going to start looking like this. So it's a really quick way to get that mobile app look and feel. All right, another one, Essential Touch is also very good. It's very, very fast. It's optimized for WebKit-based browsers, meaning that it's not going to work on all browsers. So that's something to keep in mind. But this one is also quite popular. Works on a whole range of devices. It can be fairly complicated to use. A little bit difficult for beginners, but certainly is another option. Another one which is very, very popular at the moment, you may have heard of this one, AngularJS. And it comes with Ionic as well. So this has been developed by Google. It's responsive. The AngularJS is separate from the Ionic. Ionic is the UI look and feel with all the controls, and AngularJS actually allows you to work with MVC. So if you've got a really nicely structured piece of software, which is broken down into model views and controllers, if you're familiar with that, I'm not going to go into what that really is, but what it does is it provides a nice interface between your HTML and your very nicely structured piece of software. So if you're wanting to pull back information out of a structured data source and get it into your HTML, this is one way that you can do it. So rather than just building, straight HTML, which has got nothing else in it really, and it's just looking a bit like spaghetti code, this provides that nice link between what you've got behind the scenes. All right. So here's a bit more that we can see. So this is some examples, and you can see here what we've got down here. It's very much just straight HTML, nothing too special about it, and yet it ends up looking a bit like that. All right. So once we've picked what framework we want to work with, then the next thing is how to install this thing. So our goal is to get something which will run on a mobile device, which is an actual app. It's not just loading from a server and it's clicked on with an icon, pops up, runs locally. We can turn the internet off, the thing still works. And that's what PhoneGap is going to give for us. Now, we have two ways of actually building this. So we can either build it through the cloud, or we can do a local build. So cloud building, what this lets you do is you write all your HTML code, you look at it in your browser on your computer, and then you zip up the entire contents of everything you've built. So your www directory, including all scripts, JavaScript, images, and so forth, and then you upload it to Adobe Build. And then Adobe Build will provide you with actual downloadable apps. So it will build one for Android, which will give you an APK file. It will build one for iOS, which will give you a .ipa file, and then it will give you a similar one for .NET for Windows as well. So these can be installed onto your device. If you wanted to go for iOS, you can either do it through iTunes or TestFlight or something like that. But what's actually provided for you is a QR code which comes up on the screen within Adobe Build, and you can just literally scan it with your phone and it will install it straight onto your phone through the air like that. So it's really, really nice, very, very easy. Now, this was what I was going to show you tonight, but as it's actually worked out, I think that we're almost close to having more than enough tonight to fill your brain up. So I'll be putting that into the second video, which I'll record tomorrow, and we'll upload that for you, which goes through everything to do with installation. So cloud building is a great way to get everything onto multiple devices. Now, the only problem though with this is that you haven't got an emulator, as in when you debug, all you're really looking at is what's in your web browser. And this is not ideal, particularly if we're using some of the PhoneGap features, which are things like, accessing the GPS, for instance. Well, your web browser inside your desktop, that's just not going to work. So you can't really test all the PhoneGap features when you're doing that. So ideally, what you want is some kind of emulator in order to test it, or to try and get it onto your phone. Now, you're not going to be able to do that very effectively by every time you wanted to test, uploading it to the cloud and then QR scanning and putting it onto your phone. That's a very slow way of trying to do development. So if you're really serious about it, what you will want to do is to have some kind of local development environment sitting on your PC. So the Android configuration on Windows can be hell. And I've said that's an understatement. The reason for this is that there are lots and lots of bits of advice floating around the internet. If you Google how to do this, you'll come across about 10 different ways to do it. And any of them on their own, I think, are wrong from what I've come across. So what I've done is to actually go through it step by step. And as I've said, I've screenshotted the whole way to get it right. I think it took me the first time I tried to do it about 5 hours before I figured out exactly how to get it working. But I'll just take you through very basically what is required. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get your development environment installed. Now, in the case of doing an Android build, you'll need to get Eclipse. Now, you can get a download of Eclipse, which includes the Android development kit as well, rather than having to install that separately. So you can get Eclipse plus ADK. If you search for that, again, if you wait till tomorrow, I can provide that for you. And so that comes with all the SDKs you need as well. Then you're also going to need to get an installation of Java. Now, not the runtime environment that you would already have that within your browser. It regularly pops up and says you need another installation of Java. So it's not that one. You actually need to get the developer kit for Java. So we download that as well. Then there are another few plugins as well that you've got to get, which I forget off the top of my head. There's one called Node.js, which is required as well. You've got to download that. And so finally, once you get that all downloaded, then you install Eclipse, and then you have to set up emulators as well. So Eclipse is the development environment for doing normal Android native application building. You didn't generally write it in Java with Eclipse. So what you do is you fire up Eclipse, and then you set up some emulators from there. And then once that's all running, then you install PhoneGap, and then you run it from there, and then it will call Eclipse, and then you have an emulator. So I'll be taking you through all that for you. Now, if you are wanting to do iOS development on Windows, you can't. Okay, you cannot deploy. Well, there is no emulator running on Windows for an iOS device. If you want to do that, you're going to have to do that on a Mac, and actually use the one out of Xcode so that you can test it on the emulator that's available within Xcode, which is what I just showed you before. That was Xcode. So there's a little emulator there that you can use, and you can run your app within that. Other than that, if you really want to work with iOS, then what you're going to have to do is do a cloud build if you've only got a PC. So that's some things to think about. So what I would tend to do, and this would be my preference for working, is I would put a local installation of whatever your main development environment is. So if say you're working from a Mac, then install Xcode and the emulator there, do all your work there. And then if you're wanting to build for other applications, you then upload it to, other platforms, you upload it to the cloud build, and you do all your builds for all the other devices through there. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. All right, so the requirements for cloud building are pretty simple. All you've got to do is zip up the folder, as I said, from the web folder. You upload it to Adobe Build. It will generate all the versions. If you want to send it to the store, then you attach the keys. I'll be talking about what keys are in the next few weeks, and then you use the QR code, and it will put it automatically onto your phone. That'll allow you to distribute it or upload it. Okay, so the first thing that you need if you're going to be working with Android, now this is just the very basic thing. As I said, I'm going to be talking about this in a different lecture, but Node.js, that's the one you're going to need to do. That's the very first part that you'll be required to know. All right, file structure. The file structure of a PhoneGap application follows pretty much a normal website structure if you've worked with a website. So you'll have a folder for scripts, one for CSS, one for images. And of course, everything should be local. So none of this http://www. whatever. All the files, all the JavaScript, everything else should be sitting there locally, because that then means that when somebody fires this up as an app, it's not going off the internet, to try and download this stuff. It's running locally. It's going to be nice and fast. All right. Now I've talked through that. I think that is pretty much it for tonight. So we've covered off quite a lot. Now, what I would encourage you to do is, particularly if you're based on PC, what I would like you to do is to watch my installation video, which I'll put up tomorrow. And your homework, if you want to work on it this week, is to get an installation up and running. And so that you have Android with Eclipse running on your machine, and then do a small build and use the Adobe Cloud build and try and get something running on your phone. Now, there's no reason why you can't do that. So even if, I had a question from someone before which said, what if I've only got an iOS device? Well, what you can do is you can do the build in Android, get that all running, and then upload it, and then it'll build to iOS, and then put it onto your iOS device. So even if you're building in an Android one on a PC, it's still going to work. All right. Well, I think that's all. I'm just going to check here with James and see if there's anything else that we need to go through tonight. I think that's pretty much it. Okay. Was there anything you want to say, James?
Hey, Steve, we've had a few questions throughout the night. I'd like to see a lot of them on the forums, but maybe we'll pick out just a couple now to go over now, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
One that propped up a few times is probably just related to debugging and developing with iOS apps with PhoneGap.
Sure.
And essentially the worry of, I guess, two parts is, do you need to have an iOS device to do your testing on, or can you debug it locally on a computer? And do you need to have a developer account?
Okay, well, in terms of a developer account, you don't need to have an iOS developer account in order to run it on your phone. So if you have an iPhone, you can actually deploy directly to the iPhone without an Apple developer account. So that will still work. But if you want to go any further than that, if you want to put it on the store, and I think if you've got to try and get it on multiple phones, I'd have to check on that. But certainly just, for the basic work, you don't need to have a developer account. You can get it up and running without that. So that would work. And what the other question was in terms of actually debugging, was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you debug on your computer?
You can debug. Well, because we're working with cross-platform, you can debug in the Android emulator or simulator, but it's not going to be a specific iOS. You're not debugging specifically for iOS. So when you do the build, you'd have to upload it to Adobe Build, and then that would push it onto your iOS device. But yeah, there's no way that you can really debug specifically for iOS unless you're going to go onto a Mac and do it through Xcode. But I mean, the whole goal of this really is not to do anything that's too platform specific anyway. So does that answer the question? I'm not sure if I'm answering what I
Totally,
actually asked
thanks.
for.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it does.
Okay. Yeah.
It's true. That's a lot about PhoneGap is being not device specific.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I mean, if you're getting to the stage where you need to do something specifically for Android or specifically for iOS, then what you're really talking about then is a native app at that point. So what you can do though, and this is, I don't know if this is something we'll cover in this course. It might go a little bit outside the scope of what we're talking about, but what you can do is do, say, 90% of the build in PhoneGap to give you all the basic functionality of the app. And then if there are platform specific features, you take your PhoneGap output and you put it into an Xcode project, and then you write the native stuff just for that device. And then you take the same thing to Android and you import that into an Android project, and then you write the specific Android code there. So that tends to be if you've got something that's only going to work on one device. Say for instance, you're writing a weather app with a barometer. Okay, and the iPhone 6 is the only device that's got that I'm aware of at the moment. So that would be something specifically designed just for that. You might have to do that through Xcode, but everything else would work fine.
That's
But
very cool. Actually, that was going to be the next question I was going to
right.
put to you from Barry,
Okay.
which was about whether you can mix PhoneGap with the native development.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
great.
No, you can. You can. Yep. All
All right,
right.
I'll put forward one more. We just had a question: is can the app built with PhoneGap send push notifications?
Push notifications are supported. Now, you've got to remember that push notifications actually are initiated by a server. So, push notifications don't. I mean, if you're aware of how they work, you set them up and then you transmit them, and then devices respond to push notifications. So, yes, PhoneGap will work with push notifications and it will respond to them. In terms of actually initiating them, that's something completely different, which is the server based. But yes, in terms of support, they do work. Yep.
Cool, thanks. There's more questions streaming in, and I'm sorry, everyone. There's no possible way we can get to them all
Okay.
uh, without keeping up everyone up all night and day.
Yeah, well, I'm in Queensland, so it's an hour earlier for me. So it's all right. Okay, so that's it then for tonight, is it, James? Is that what we got? Or?
I think so. Thanks
Okay.
so much for everyone for asking so much and joining in so much. I'd really push for anyone whose questions gone unanswered. I'm sorry. If you could please go to the discussion forums and post it up there, we'll get a good discussion going about it.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being so interested in this. As I said, it's a really fantastic technology. It's something that when I discovered PhoneGap, I just kind of shook my head because I realized I'd spent years literally working on some of the stuff to then be able to do something in HTML, which was 80 to 90% of what I was able to achieve in in a native language, which was much more difficult. So I think you will all actually really get a lot out of what we're going to be building over the next few weeks, and to actually have native apps sitting on a bunch of different devices. It's going to be something that's very cool. So I do encourage you to work your way through the video that I'm going to do tomorrow, because the end result of that is actually going to be, it's a very basic app. It's basically this one screen that says I'm working. It's hello world basically, but it will run on all the devices that you've got, and you'll be able to install it. So I think that would be the goal for everybody. If you can try and achieve that over that next week, that'll mean we're all in the same position when we come again next week, that we can start getting into the features of PhoneGap itself and starting to deploy some HTML, but it really does rely on you all having either a development environment locally or having that cloud-based one that we can push to. All right. Okay, well, thanks very much for all that. Well, I'm going to stop this now. We'll upload this video for you, so this will be available tomorrow. And if you want to, go through it in more detail, or for those of you who weren't able to actually make it live. All right, thanks very much. We'll talk to you next week.